Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1738. The topic is training and the title is Intensity Regulation, Percentages versus RPE versus RIR. So what in the world is all that? Well, a listener and fellow trainer reached out and suggested this topic. They wrote, percentage-based training versus RPE versus RIR. I know percentage-based training is old school, but if it's what Louis taught, and that's good enough for me. Just wanted your thoughts on the pros and cons of each. So Louis is Louis Simmons from Westside Barbell, and he did use percentage-based training, like programming and whatnot. So absolutely, definitely true. If Louis Simmons taught it, it's probably pretty damn good. So we're going to go through what these are, how you can use them, and kind of a little bit of the pros and cons, like they asked about. So percentage-based training is for lifts when you know a max, which is typically squat, bench, and deadlift. Louis Simmons taught predominantly powerlifting. He taught a lot of other sports, but he was, I believe, mostly famous for powerlifting. And in powerlifting, you're going to pretty much know what your 1 rep max is of squat, bench, and deadlift. And then as you get further into training, you'll start to know your 1 rep max for accessory lifts, such as an elevated or a deficit deadlift, or box squat versus regular free weight squat. Maybe close grip bench press, or two board press versus a regular press. You're going to start to know some maxes, some 1 rep maxes. So percentages can be very helpful to help regulate intensity and to kind of give an estimation of what would be a challenging weight, but not an all-out crazy kill yourself kind of weight. If you're just wanting to refine technique, get a strength stimulus, but you don't want to risk injury or risk bad technique being reinforced. So the flaw in which I typically see in this is trainers will often use a singular percent. So I saw a gym member. Not all members of Brutal Iron Gym follow my programming. I know, it's crazy. Don't know why. But they'll often come to me when they have programming questions, even though it's not my program. And one person, semi-recently, I think it was a couple weeks back or a month or so, they came back and they asked me about their program, and they were told to do 3 sets of 4 reps at 87.5%. Well, they did 1 set of 4, the other set, they tried to get 4, they couldn't quite get it, they did 3, another 3, and then the last one, the 3rd rep looked like they died. So it was just absolutely atrocious. So they felt like a failure, and they were bummed, and they were asking like what they could do, like should they do an extra set to make up for the missed reps, and just challenging for them. But they were told to do 4 reps, exactly at 87.5%. I'm not a big fan of that. I would rather, and what I actually use with my clients when I use percentages, is I use ranges. So for example, I might have somebody do 5 sets of 4 reps between 82.5 and 87.5%. I'll typically use 5% ranges, but sometimes I will narrow that range down depending on the advanced level, like how advanced the athlete is. But I like to use ranges because every single time you lift, you're not coming into the gym the exact same person. What feels like 90% one day might feel like 100% the next day. If you have variations in sleep, if you have variations in nutrition, maybe you're dehydrated, maybe you missed a meal, maybe you got to sleep in because it's you don't normally train. Maybe you train on a Friday, you normally have work, but you'd work off. So you slept in extra, you got 1 meal and you hit the gym at noon, and typically you don't get to the gym till 5 p.m. So all of a sudden at noon, you're feeling freaking amazing. You're blowing through the numbers. And it's like, dang, last week this felt like it killed me. So we can have huge variations based on sleep, based on nutrition, hydration, and life stress. When you're going through a lot of crap in life, that is competing for nervous system, kind of health, I guess we could say it like that, is your nervous system isn't going to be as excited and responsive, like explosive, if you're dealing with a lot of crap in life. So a singular percent, such as 87.5, like that client had, like that gym member had, 87.5 is going to feel really different some days versus other days. So I like having a range. And then what I do is I coach my athletes to start at the bottom of the range and work up. So if they're doing 5 sets, I would say do the first set at the bottom of the range. If it feels good, technique was good, move up a little bit. If that feels good, move up a little bit. If that feels good, move up a little bit. But likewise, maybe they get to the 4th set and they're like, oof, that was miserable. I don't think I'm going to be able to maintain good technique at the next set if I stay here. I'll say, okay, we'll just come down a little bit of weight, or maybe I'll have them drop a rep. It just depends on kind of if we're progressing in weight load, peaking them towards the meet. I don't want them to come down in weight load. But if we're just in the off season and we're trying to build muscle tissue, I would rather than bring the weight down and get the extra kind of time under the bar, the extra muscle damage, another eccentric load, just get more of that muscular damage component that you would look for in like a building season. So it depends on the client, depends on what situation they're in. But when I use percentages, I do like to use ranges, and I like to encourage them to start at the bottom of the range and work up if their technique feels good, but also to be able to regulate that and bring it back down if technique starts to crash and burn. And the reason why that still works, like I've helped people get to elite totals and do very, very well in powerlifting. And the reason why it works is strength adaptation comes from nervous system stress. Our body has to feel as though a weight load is stressing and stressful to the muscles, to the joints, to the body in general. Like, oh dear God, if I don't lift this, if he ever does this to me again, or she ever does this to me again, if I don't lift this, I'm going to get really hurt. I need to get stronger. So it's the body's perception of stress. Since we know that what we feel as stressful can change based on sleep, nutrition, outside of the gym stress and whatnot, the stress that we create in the gym that produces an adaptation can be modified. And what I mean by that is whether you do 85% or 87.5%, if they both equally felt horrible on the body and like you barely made it, your body's going to adapt from either one. So why not use the one that doesn't risk injury? Why not use the one that doesn't cause a failed lift, which can jack up confidence? And why not use the one that doesn't reinforce improper technique just to kind of squeeze out the extra rep, right? So we can avoid injury, we can avoid small aches and pains, we can avoid confidence hits, we can avoid, just delayed technical development by using a percentage range and allowing the person to modify within that range. So I do use percentages. I like them a lot, but I like them with ranges. And then I go through and I look at my clients' videos. I coach them to go up or down within the range their next workout, depending on the technique of the quality and how they reported feeling. If they're feeling beat up, I'm going to tell them to stay in the bottom of the range. If they smoked them all and they did great, and I would say, hey, next time go ahead and start at the middle of the range and work up. You're moving really well right now. We're kicking butt, so we can go ahead and push the intensity a little bit. So I watch their videos, give them a little feedback, and we just modify that every week. So I do like percentages. RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion. The way they use it in powerlifting is typically a scale of like 1 to 10, but nobody uses like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So most of the time you're going to see probably often somewhere between 5 and 10. Very rarely are you going to see down at like 5 and 6. Most RPE scales are going to be, I guess you'd see it somewhere in there. So 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9, 9.5, and 10. So they go by 0.5 increments. An example could be you want to do 3 sets of 2 reps at 8.5 RPE. I'm not a big fan of rate of perceived exertion. I have practiced with it, played with it with clients and stuff, so I've given it a fair chance, but I don't like it. I just don't. The main reason why is people's perception of what an 8 is or what an 8.5 is so insanely different. I mean, there's the range in which people can interpret those numbers is enormous. Absolutely enormous. So if you give somebody, 3 sets of 2 reps at 8.5 RPE, some people it looks like a 2 rep max, and then others it looks like they could have done set of 5 or 6 if they wanted to. So the interpretation range is just astronomical. I've seen people, like, you could easily see a swing of like 5 reps, where somebody stops at 2 reps and they died on the second one, so they should have stopped at 1, or they stop at 2, but they really could have done 5 if they wanted, or 6 reps. They're like, well, it felt hard. I'm like, nah, you felt challenged to remember and maintain the cues, but the weight load actually wasn't hard. There's a difference. And then we have to talk through that perceptual difference, and it just takes more work. It takes more on my end to try to teach somebody how to utilize RPE comparative to percentages and RIR, which I'll explain in a second. So I'm not as much of a fan of RPE. Now, I do know that people use it very successfully. I know there are a lot of coaches that use it, a lot of athletes that really like it. So I do understand that people use RPE and they find it to be very beneficial. I just have not found that with my clients. With my clients, it takes a longer process to get them to understand proper intensity, like how I define an 8 and how they define an 8 to be the same. That takes much longer in RPE than percentages. Percentages gets them within the interpretation range much quicker and easier. And then RIR, they seem to have a closer accuracy to the interpretation, and then it's an easier refinement as well. So it's not that RPE doesn't work. I know it works. I know a lot of people like it. I personally just have not found it to be very successful with my clients. None of the clients I used it with enjoyed that. So when we switched over to percentages and we switched over to RIR, every single one said that was a much better process. So, you can try RPEs, see what you think. It's very challenging to understand the rate of perception of like challenge of something, say like a 9 versus 9.5. What the hell is that? I'm just not a big fan of it. So RIR is reps in reserve, and I do use this. So an example of this would be I want somebody to do 3 sets of 3 with 1 RIR. Now, I often will give them a range, like 1 to 2 RIR, or I'll say a strict 1 RIR. Just kind of depends on how close I want them to be with the definition of intensity that I'm looking for. But that would be an example, is 3 sets of 3 reps with 1 RIR, with 1 rep in reserve. So the idea of that is you do 3 sets of 3 reps with the weight that you could have done for 4. So you left 1 rep in reserve, right? Seems like it makes sense. I do like this, and I use it quite often. I feel that the way in which people interpret reps in reserve is much more accurate than rate of perceived exertion. So with RIR, people are very minimally off. There may be 1 rep short, 1 rep long, kind of like 1 rep under, 1 rep over. The range is not too far off. So I like that a lot. And I really like this because we don't always know what our 1 rep max of movements are. Sometimes we're coming into a new movement. Sometimes we haven't done a certain movement for 6 months. And it's like, I sure as hell hope we're stronger than 6 months ago. So we don't want to do percentages of a 1 rep max that was 6 months ago, because you tend to undertrain them until you find the new max. So for example, if you're doing a close grip bench press 6 months ago, maybe they topped out at 315. We've done a lot of tricep work since then, and then all of a sudden they really could max 345, and you have to run the percentages off the 315. You might undertrain them until you retest that max. So for accessory movements and for new movements and anything that's kind of a higher rep range than 5, I do like to use RIR, reps in reserve, because I feel like it's a better way to manage intensity. So, for example, somebody can't do 87.5% of an unknown max. So if you don't have a max, you can't do percentages. You would have to estimate, but that's you might as well estimate an RIR. It's just a better accuracy estimation. So I'm much more fan of RIR for new movements, infrequent movements, things that are higher rep ranges. So pretty much anything without a known max, or anything that's infrequent, anything that has higher reps. So that is my advice. Now, this is just what's worked for me. I understand everybody got to find their own thing, but I work with a huge range of people. I've worked with people who are brand new to lifting, where I had to teach them the difference between a barbell and a dumbbell. And I have people who are elite, and actually international elite, in powerlifting. Very, very, very successful. but also that huge of a range. And what I've found is with people anywhere within the range, percentages and RIR work really well. RPE can be done, but it just takes more explanation and it takes a little bit longer. People tend to be a little more frustrated with that. So percentages and RIR are what I prefer. But as I said, try it for yourself and see what you think. Okay. Well, if you want any help with coaching, any kind of programming stuff, we do have our one-on-one coaching service, which you can learn about on our website. And we do have our live monthly programming service. And one of the programming features is powerlifting. So it is a powerlifting program for just $50 a month, and you get unlimited Q&A. So you get a program every 4 weeks, brand new exercises, and we use things like RIR, we use things like percentages. There's educational components within the programming. It's great programming, and you get to ask me unlimited questions. So really awesome services, and that's only $50 a month. So pretty awesome. You can find all that stuff on our website at www.brutalirongym.com. So thank you to the listener and trainer who sent in the question. Love this stuff. Hopefully everybody else found it interesting and helpful. If you have any questions, if you need anything, email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. And if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.